This market right now, I'm telling you, we're going to go back and we're going to look back years to come from now, and we're going to go back and say this particular time in travel healthcare was a real turning point in how things changed and evolved. I really believe that in my heart of hearts. I saw it coming, and you can still feel it coming right now. It is a tumultuous time. It is a time where we really need to start to take a deep breath and say, what's going on? What's happening here? What can we expect in the future? What's this kind of crazy feeling that I'm getting as a traveler, maybe as an agency, maybe as a vendor, and certainly at a facility? We're going to talk about it on this week's edition of Travel Evolved. It's Travel Evolved. I'm Mark Holloway. Welcome to the episode, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a really great summer so far, and we're right smack in the middle of it, at least when we're recording this. And I think the team's keeping up on the editing of these episodes because I give them some pretty rough material sometimes. It's always not perfect, especially when you're working remotely, but it is what it is, as they say. So thank you for joining me again today. I really want to push this podcast. Like I say, if you are one of the many people out there that are watching us and listening to us, regardless of which platform and how you're doing it, I would really appreciate you spreading the word, letting people know that we're there. I do believe, and maybe you would agree with me, that if people were to go back and to start looking and listening to the episodes from the very beginning, this is our 60th episode, by the way, then they would get something out of those early ones. I think it's important to kind of build that foundation. I think right now the reason that we're pushing more listenerships and for you guys to start telling your friends about this and to get involved in our Facebook page is that it's kind of that time. What we're going to talk about today, the market is shifting. There is new trends in the industry. Finally, this business is starting to at least feel like it wants to start changing. And I'm seeing that and hearing that from an agency standpoint. They still may be doing it the wrong way, but there's some acknowledgement out there, I think at least, that the way things have been done for the entire history of this industry aren't necessarily going to be good practices going forward. And it's to me, that's really good because it hasn't felt like that for a long time. Like I've said to you guys many times, there's this kind of good old boy mentality in our industry. That's why there's so many spin-offs of just a handful of companies, and they all do it the exact same way because everyone has realized, hey, I can do the same thing as my person that taught me, and I can try to do it a little better. I can make my own, fortune, and they do. But no one has really ever been interested in kind of changing the way that people travel. And I've always felt like the minute we started to do that, it would eventually, not originally, but eventually it would start to really benefit the traveler. So I'm starting to see the beginnings of that, and that's why I think it's so very important right now for us to really focus on. I'm just asking you guys, if you want to pay me back for any of the time I've done working on these things, and I'm not trying to appease you, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of time to do these things. It's almost like a second job sometimes that I don't get paid for. It's like being a musician that goes and works for free. It's hard. If you want to pay me back, what I'm getting at is just tell a couple of people. Mention our podcast on some Facebook groups, and people are asking, and it's Travel Evolved. There's a D at the end of that. Some people always say Travel Evolved. It must be the way I say it that has people think that it's Travel Evolved. That's where I'm trying to evolve the travel. So it is Travel Evolved, if that makes sense. So anyway, please help me out by mentioning that. If you haven't already, I would urge you guys to jump onto our Facebook group, which is also just called Travel Evolved. You can find it. I think it has the same logo as our podcast does on it, so it's really easy to see. We are beginning to put some really interesting content on there. We got a whole bunch of stuff planned, so a lot of things that are going to be companions to this podcast and this YouTube channel that have anything from calculators on it to GSA information and how to calculate your overtime and all these different things we're talking about, and even just snippets of some of these podcasts, things that we think will be helpful reminders. We're going to have on there, and I want you guys that are a part of Travel Evolve. We've got over 2,200 people, or close to 3,000, I guess. I can't remember which it is now, that are on that page. You can also get involved and start asking some good questions on there. We've got a ton of staff now that are actually administrators on that page, so they're going to be able to answer some questions, and they know what they're doing and what they're talking about, so it's going to be really great. So that's my pitch to you today, is tell people about this podcast, this YouTube channel. Have people and do it yourself join us in the Travel Evolve Facebook group, because you're going to see some interesting stuff there that is not going to be about having recruiters post a job that 300 of us all have, and each person pitching their latest and greatest rate on those. I think that's all it is on Facebook. I'm trying to catch you at their, here's my job, here's my proposal for this particular job that all of us have. Hopefully I caught you at the right time when you're going to call me and get it. That's all it is. As a matter of fact, I've been kicked out of groups because I didn't do that. I didn't post a job. You have to be a job posting. I'm like, well, what's the point in that? It just, to me, it's ridiculous. And that's what I'm talking about when I say the industry needs to evolve. And I'm starting to finally see some shifting in that maybe people are realizing that way of recruiting and placing people and communicating jobs is potentially becoming antiquated and starting to maybe phase out. You guys see it. You guys know it's coming. I've said I don't care if you like it or not, and I've always told you I'm going to tell you what I think, and it's going to be my honest opinion. And it doesn't have any bearing on whether or not, if it's popular with you guys. But this is coming. There are some changes in the industry, and that's what we want to talk about, the state of the market right now. And I think this is a great way to kind of get going. So last little appeasal, join us on Facebook group, and we're going to see some good stuff coming. I really appreciate you guys. And again, our numbers are climbing on this podcast, so people are starting to, I think, see it and take notice. And I think there's plenty of room for other people to learn what it is that you guys already know and where we're going to go. Again, this second season, tons and tons of content that I think are going to surprise you. There was so many topics that are fundamentally challenging, that are wrong in the industry, that we haven't even addressed yet, and when they're coming up here in this season. But I want to take a break this week. And this is kind of one of those impromptu episodes. We just felt the things we're hearing from our own particular travelers out there, from other travelers that are asking me outside of our organization, that are asking me about just different things. It really feels like it was time to take a step outside of our planned episodes and do kind of a current state of affairs, so to speak, on what's going on in our industry. And that's why we decided we wanted to do this episode. I think it's kind of important, and I think for whether you're a brand new traveler, you're a veteran traveler, to kind of take a deep breath and just hear me out on some of this stuff. I think it might help, get your head in a good place that will allow you to be able to make some good decisions on what's best for you as a traveler. And like I've always said, and I'm going to say it a bunch of times in this episode, only you know what travel assignment, and whether traveling in general, what makes sense to you at the current time. And I think that changes for many of you. The problem with all of us agencies is that we I apologize for all the beeping and stuff that's going on. We tend to lump everybody into a certain category. What we're doing as an agency, obviously, is we're trying to hit the masses, the biggest bang for the buck. So we treat everybody the same way. We assume that you're all traveling for money and the best locations, because that is the masses. The majority of you are. But like I've always said, every traveler is completely unique. The problem is there's no real way to get to know to that level until you've been working with somebody and you really understand what they're doing. And that's what good recruiters do, is they get down to the fundamentals. They know what makes you tick. They know the assignments that you like, the ones you don't. It takes a while for that to happen. That's the problem, is there's no real way to shortcut that. And not every recruiter is good enough to be able to do that. You guys still tell me all the time that you promised your recruiter, I think Steve did it a few weeks ago, that I only want to be in this state. Next thing they're pitching you across the country, and he's like, well, that's funny. I didn't think that was in my state, and with his sense of humor. I mean, that's very typical. What they're doing is they're doing their best to make money and to book you, whether it's pressure from their numbers, they're worried about losing their job, worried about putting food on the table. So they're going to, of course, do what's always best for them and hopefully, they know they're not going to take a job that's not best for you. But what I'm getting at is that your job really is that you guys know what you want to do and where you want to go. And for this episode, there's no cookie cutter way to address this. Things are just changing. Things are in a little bit of a state of flux right now because of what the pandemic did to healthcare. How so many travelers jumped in that were, looking at travelers coming to their facility and went, wait a minute, what am I doing? Hold the phone here a second. Why am I still sitting here as a staff, employee, and everybody in my unit, whether I'm allied or nursing, is coming in making literally 5 times the amount, plus in many cases, that I'm making. I could literally go across town or go across the state and do the same thing. So many of you and they did that. And there's nothing wrong with that. We needed it as a country. There was that kind of demand and there was that little supply. So a lot of you guys went out and you went for it. So what's happening now, as you guys have all, as you well know, and as we've documented here on Travel Evolved a lot, is that it's kind of, things have shifted back now. There is less demand. There is a huge ton of supply. I think, by the way, personally, the supply is diminishing every day. I see it on my end. There are travelers turning down lucrative assignments, lucrative extensions, because it's not the money that they're used to making. That is not a judgment call on my part. It just means that they had either an ill-conceived amount of money that they felt that they should be making, or they had a legitimate conceived amount of money they should be making. It just hasn't happened to be there now. Either way, it doesn't really matter. The money's not paying what it was. And for many travelers, that's not enough for them to justify jumping on the road and leaving their life and their family. I totally understand. What's hard for somebody like me who's been in the industry so long is the rates are still phenomenal compared to what they were for 90%, 95% of my entire career. 5 years ago, we would be clicking our heels to be able to pitch these kinds of opportunities to travelers and saying, my gosh, people would be jumping through hoops to take these jobs. Now they're going, I'm offended, or it's not enough money for me because it's not what they're used to. And again, that's not a judgment call on my part. It's the facts. So it's created a really unique time frame in our industry. And like I said earlier, one that I think is going to have us going back saying, remember in 2022 when things were kind of coming back, and this is when things really started to change and shift. And that's kind of exactly where we are right now. Look at it, recognize it. I think as a traveler, this is the time that you have to really do some introspection and really start to think about, in episodes we've done before, why am I traveling? What is it I'm really trying to gain? Am I trying to gain incredible wealth? And is travel healthcare, whether you're, again, an allied professional or a nursing professional, is there going to be enough money in a sustainable scenario for me to make guaranteed income that I need to make over the course of a 12-month period, a 6-month period, a 6-year period? And right now, you have to look at what are the current pay rates, because oftentimes, most of the time, you guys are not being given the bill rates. But the pay rates obviously are a reflection of what the bill rate should be. Not always, as we've said. But what does that look like? What is my gross income? How much of that is going to be tax-free? And what does that mean I'm going to be, basically putting in my pocket over the next period of time that I'm interested in being a traveler for? And I think for many of you, this is a good time to start saying, is this enough money? It may or may not be. But to have a realistic expectation of it, like I said, I've got people turning down basically $150,000 a year incomes as a nurse. What they're saying to me is, well, I can make more money than that hourly back at my home facility. And they're looking at it, and I think they're looking at the hourly taxable that so many companies are presenting them, and they're saying that doesn't make sense, but they're forgetting a little bit about the per diem, which is, again, limited based upon the GSA. So they're forgetting about that additional amount, and of course, they're assuming they're going to be maximizing and paying for every penny of their housing. Many of you are right now because housing is so incredibly expensive. But that's what I've always said. You have to look at everything and say, does $150,000 gross, obviously income, justify me making it? I've got travelers right now, and I'm talking about places like Tennessee, North Carolina, that are telling me, no, that's not enough money. $150,000 is not enough money to justify me not being permanent, and with benefits, the whole deal. So I sit there and say, what is it that you're making? And we're hearing things all over the place. Obviously, staff positions seem to be paying a little bit higher right now. But that's where I kind of go, man, I feel like it's time to do an episode because $150,000 a year income 5 years ago would have been, I mean, our best nurses, and we were one of the top paying companies out there, would get into the low six-figure incomes if they really did well. I mean, we're talking 2016, 2017, maybe even 2018. If you really, stuck with your game and you only had maybe a week off in between assignments and you looked for strong paying assignments but still were able to get good locations, $110,000, $115,000 a year annual income was pretty solid back in 2017. And for those of you that have been there, tell me if I'm right or wrong. Put the comments down below. It was a good amount to work for. Not every traveler made it. Most of the ones that used to work for me were there because we paid higher, and we kept track of what they wanted to do, and the recruiters were trained to work with them on making sure they would hit their own financial goals. I'm talking about the travelers. Nowadays, that 115 seems to instantly be not enough, which tells me that there's a whole bunch of brand new travelers in there that are used to higher income. Again, this is not a judgment call. It's just that's the income they were used to making. And I don't know, I can't predict the future. I don't know if they're going to make that ever again. And if they do, I think we can all kind of say with a pretty decent amount of trust in this statement is that it probably wouldn't be for a very long time like it wasn't before. I mean, this industry doesn't typically pay $500,000 for a traveler. It just isn't set up. The hospitals are not set up to pay every traveler a $500,000 a year income, which is what many of you guys were making in 2021, late 2020, early 2021, easily. Even into, I would say, most of the year 2021. A lot of people that worked for me were making insane money. And look at how many people were complaining about the taxes they were paying on that amount because there was a limit to what they could take tax-free, and everyone was maxing that out. So most of that income was taxable, and most of that went right to Uncle Sam and to your state, which is the way it's always been in our country. So it's been a crazy couple of years now, and I think so far the things I've said were happening are happening. Rates are coming down to, here's what I'll tell you. Rates came down. I'm jumping around my script a little bit, but they did. And now what I'm seeing is some of the hospital rates that went down so low, I'm talking about in June, for extensions, for offers, they weren't filling them. So hospitals tried. Give them the nod. Every business and every industry is going to do their best to save money. So they tried their best. I hate the word try. They tried their best to get $100 bill rates back into play. I saw some $85 bill rates where rates were $115, $120 in some more rural parts of the country, and all of a sudden they were asking $85 for extension, which is back to basically 2019 rates. And travelers were turning them down. So what I'm seeing now is they're picking it back up again. I had a few extensions recently where the hospital said, this is what we're doing, this is only what we're doing, there will not be anything else is what we have across the board. And lo and behold, 3 of those offers, I think out of 4 that we had just last week for extension, they all went, okay. I think all my travelers said, nah, I don't want to take it, it's not worth it. And they all went, 3 out of 4 of them went, well, let's sweeten that deal a little bit. So they were doing their best to try their best to go almost as low as they possibly could. When they weren't getting the fulfillment, then they went back up. And, that's what I've always will tell a traveler is that what may not make sense to you probably is going to make sense to somebody else. It may not be you. It may not be, it could be a brand new traveler. It could be somebody with less experience in your industry, in your field than you have. It could be somebody who's living close to that location that it makes sense financially for them to take a lower paying assignment because they get to go home 3 or 4 days out of the week and they're not living, remotely. So it's a little more justified. Like I said, there's so many different reasons for a traveler to take an assignment that they're not, rarely are they the same reasons that you take them. So again, that's just the way it goes. The one thing I think this industry needs more than anything is to stop trying to sell travelers on what makes sense to them. And I think it's hard as a recruiting agency to not sell. That's you train people for. Whether people admit it or not, most people don't. And I listen, I know there's a bunch of recruiters out there that have a lot of hate for me, but I'm just being honest. And one thing I think that they would at least admit is that I'm not wrong. They may not like the fact that I'm pointing out that they're salespeople, and there's nothing wrong with it. Listen, I've been a salesperson my whole life. I'm selling you guys right now. I asked you just a little while ago to please, jump on my podcast. If I want more viewership, I'm selling that. No doubt about it. I want to have a bigger audience, so I have a bigger voice. That's just the way it is. Recruiters have to be honest and say, yeah, they want you to take a job with them. They do not want you to take that same job with any of their competitors that hold that same contract, whether it's at a higher or less rate. That's their job to fight. So they're consistently trying to convince you to take something that may or may not be in your best interest. And what I love of what I'm seeing now is that through technology, some of the things are starting to happen where you're in a little bit more control of looking at what you want to do and what assignments make sense to you and when they make sense to you. All right, let me jump in with new travelers for a second. I briefly talked about. Let's talk about it a little bit more specifically. This is what I'm seeing personally with the company that I run. I'm seeing, and I did see, a horde of new travelers jump in the marketplace. People with 2-3 years of experience, no travel experience, getting offered and accepting jobs that were at $190 bill rates, which again, I don't want to talk pay rates because it depends, but those are the rates that we were seeing that we were able to bill. And for my company, that was a lot of money they were being able to pay. And I'm sure that was across the board. So that's what I saw for most of 2021. And it worried me a little bit at that point. I said, when these rates dropped, I knew they would, what's going to happen with these folks? And what I'm seeing is that many of them are saying, you know what? I think I'm out. I think I'm done. This doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Which, again, is not a surprise to me. It probably was the reason why they hadn't got into traveling before this, because it didn't make sense. Now, all of a sudden, the money made incredible sense. It was almost crazy for many of you not to want to be a traveler. So what I am personally seeing in the new travelers is that right now, in the middle of 2022, the rates that we're seeing, albeit really strong in my opinion, but that's just, again, that's me. I'm being like a recruiter. I'm making a judgment on what makes sense to me across the board. But for many people out there that are the new traveler, the new model of traveler, it doesn't make sense. So they are passing. So for those of you that are the veteran traveler, or maybe you're a new traveler that has said, hey, I was making crazy money. I knew it wouldn't last, but this is still way worth my time. There is going to be less competition. Now, I don't know how long it's going to take. But what many of you are experiencing and telling me right now is that, I see it. You get put. I have a vendor right now that I have over 100 submissions. In other words, could be the same person in front of a few jobs, but literally I can see how many people are live and in front of quote unquote positions waiting for a potential offer to get interviewed. Over 100 of them, which again depend on the size of your agency. That's small or it's a lot. But typically I don't see people, and I go back, and some of them have been in front of those positions for weeks and weeks, and it tells you, are they even going to move on it? Are they looking at this particular candidate, or are they just trying to figure out if they want to lower that rate? Excuse me. Or are they, just kind of figuring out what their census is looking like? Why isn't there movement? Why aren't they closing this job? Maybe they don't have to choose my candidate, but why is this job still showing as open? But that's an incredible amount of submissions for to not have any movement on them. Now, sometimes they do move relatively quickly, but there is one particular vendor that I have that it's almost like the black hole. You throw them in front of this job, and it's like they sit there, and everyone's at, what's going on? What's going on? I'm like, I can't tell you. I don't know. I know the job's still available. I know that you haven't been chosen, but neither has anybody else. So that's good news. I have another vendor that is really on it. You put someone in front, and they're getting offered, or someone else is getting the offer immediately. I love those a lot more because it shows movement, and it allows a candidate to understand, hey, this job's not going to last that long. So we have to, this is where you want to go. You got to be ready. You got to get in front. You got to, look at the offer that's being made as far as the pay package that every particular company happens to have, and jump on it. So back to what I was saying, new travelers are, there's two things going to happen. You're going to have a whole bunch of people that are going to leave that are new travelers, and you're going to have a whole bunch of conversions of folks that are going to say, hey, this is still good enough for me. Now, my belief and my experience will tell me that the overwhelming majority of the new travelers are going to say, this is not for me. And that's kind of what I'm seeing along the lines. I'd say 2/3 to 75% of the new traveler, I'll put quotations in the air in that, are saying, what I'm seeing right now doesn't make sense. Now, I want to qualify all this because we don't know what the fall is going to bring. I've had COVID twice, both summers. I go to a gym, and gyms are just cesspools for germs. They always are. So the fact that I go to a gym, people wipe their stuff down. But I mean, the fact is, if you go to a gym, I mean, you're going to get COVID. I think there's no doubt about it. And I'm really fortunate. Last 2 summers I had it. I had a sore throat for 3 days. Never really experienced any major anything. I mean, last year I had more aches and pains with the Delta variant than I did literally I had COVID. I mean, I'm sure I'm still probably quote unquote contagious. So I had COVID last week and I had a sore throat and I sucked on a secret type thing and I was better. So I'm really fortunate that my body tends to get over COVID quick and not get it very fast, but I have it. So what I'm getting at is that this particular one that's going around out here in California that seems to be everywhere, you're going to get it if you're out here. And it's, I guess it's highly contagious. From what I'm being told, it's not incredibly dangerous. But depending upon how that's perceived as a country, whether or not that becomes more dangerous, whether there are more hospitalizations, I don't want to say anything political. It's just so you have to be careful about talking about COVID nowadays because what you say can be construed as left or right, and I don't want to be construed as either one of them. I'm just trying to tell you what I know. If facilities treat this like they were in 2021, or if it becomes where it is more, maybe I'm totally wrong, maybe it is highly deadly. If it's more contagious, who knows how it all is going to work. If this becomes a thing, that's what I'm getting at, this fall, then I would fully expect the supply and the demand to go back to a higher, disparagement, which would mean higher bill rates, more opportunity, higher pay rates. I think people that maybe are holding off right now would jump back in. I mean, the market has a way of fixing itself, and it happened already. We were short-staffed and rates went up, so we were not short-staffed anymore. Now we're overstaffed. Rates went down, and so pretty soon we're not going to be overstaffed anymore. It's just the way it kind of works itself out. But this fall will be interesting here. I think especially as we move into late September and early October to see kind of what things are looking like as a country. You throw in the cold and flu season, which we always have typically had in years past. We haven't, really even talked about the cold and flu, obviously, with other things taking precedent over that the last few years. But, I mean, people just do get sicker in the wintertime than they do. I mean, obviously, maybe that's not the case right now because people certainly... I've been sick twice in the summer, never been sick in the summer in my life, besides getting a nasal wash out in the ocean when I'm doing my attempts at surfing, which are pretty pathetic some days. And I get hit pretty hard, and next thing I know, I'm like, oh, okay, now I got a sinus infection because I just basically drank a bunch of salt water through my nose, which is never fun as you're tumbling down on there. So that happens, but I've been sick the last 2 summers in a row, and that's unusual, obviously. It's never happened to me, and I won't tell you how many years of life, but that's twice now in 2 summers in a row. Never really been sick in a summer before. So we're going to find out how that part of this equation is kind of filtered in and makes sense. But last thing we also saw the last couple of years, as you guys know, and I have one of them, we have new agencies popping in, right? Every time I turn around, I'm like, I can see on some of my vendor sites the agencies that are submitting candidates to, and I'm like, I don't recognize that. I don't recognize that. I used to know every agency, where they were. I used to know key principals in many of them, so I could recognize who we were competing against, and I could see kind of what their level of activity is. Now, every time I look and see another submission from one of the few vendors that does show you that, I'm like, I don't even know who this is. It's like XYZ company, and some of these names are like, you guys know, you've never heard of them before. They're brand new and they're interesting. And like I said, I've got one. I've got a company that was created, within this time frame. So I'm sure there are people that were like, what is that company? And the same sort of thing. So you have all these new agencies. I do believe that they're very similar to new travelers. I with my heart of hearts, believe there are agencies that got into this because they said, oh my gosh, look at the kind of revenue that can be made. And they got in during this heightened time. And they weren't wrong. Insane money. Everyone was making it. Travelers were making it. Agencies were making it. We've documented this. Vendors were making it. It was a horrific time for the country and an amazingly strong time for travelers and traveler agencies. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Once the scariness, and I shouldn't say that because I know people that are going, well, I've been scared the whole time and it was really tough on me, and I worked in a unit where people were dying. I get it. But for a lot of folks, the money, if you look at these websites, it's all people were talking about. People weren't even talking about the pandemic. They were talking about money, 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 and here's where I'm going to go. And I'm not going to go for less than that. It was to the point where it would be rare to even talk about or hear a website or a Facebook group actually discussing the dangers and what was happening in the facility. Is more about money, money, money. Go back and look and tell me if I'm wrong on that. And so I think the same thing applies to agencies. There's a bunch of agencies that said, look at what you can make. They jumped in, and now they're saying, well, and I told you guys before that many agencies really were playing with some really thick margins because travelers, I don't mean to say it sound tough, but they just didn't care. A lot of you guys just didn't care what an agency was making because you were so happy about making $5,000 a week. You didn't think about the fact that you should have been making $6,500 a week if you were working for a different company. You were just happy you were making $5,000 because you didn't care as much. I think that's human nature because you were focused on yourself. There's a ton of agencies that made way more money than that the industry has ever produced, and now they're used to that, and they're going to struggle, and you're going to see them all of a sudden disappear or get out or sell or reform or collaborate with another agency or be absorbed by another agency, all in the next couple of years, because they're going to say, whoa, much like a new traveler, this isn't really for me. This is not what I want. I'm not in this for the long haul. I made a few $1 million. I'm going to put that back into my IT business or whatever it is. I'm going to get out of this and I'm going to sell off, and you're going to see that happen. For established agencies, I think many of them struggled at the very beginning of the pandemic. I know companies that lost 80% of their job orders and they couldn't place them because they were all isolated. And if you guys remember this, a lot of the positions were isolated in certain parts of the country, which means if you didn't hold a contract with some of those facilities that were really heavy in the COVID stuff and dealing with that, then you didn't have any jobs. And there was a whole bunch of companies that panicked and lost millions and millions of dollars because they didn't hold the right contract. They weren't lucky, quote unquote, which is a horrible thing to say, that they didn't have a contract where there was a lot of COVID patients and the hospitals were busting at the seams and screaming for help. So they hurt. Then a lot of them recovered because obviously things spread out and it seemed like everybody was dealing with this stuff. And they finally, if you got through that period of time as an agency, I'm talking early 2020, the first 2 quarters of 2020, then you were like, okay, now we're starting to see some of these higher rates. We're getting them too. We can start to make money. And all of these agencies were making double the money on one traveler that they were making in 2019. So for the old established agency, I think you're going to see some stabilization with them. And you're going to see, again, I think a lot of them, I know a lot of them right now are chasing a few of us agencies who are doing some cutting edge stuff, and they're realizing, oh gosh, we are a little bit behind and we're going to get gobbled up and lost if we don't figure out how to keep up with some of the things that are happening right now. And I believe that. I've always known that. So I've always been kind of secretive about what we're doing because I know agencies are going to try to figure out how to bastardize the new technology for their own benefit. That's just the fact. Great. Love the technology. How do we make more money with technology? And that's going to be their demise. I absolutely believe it. They aren't going to be able to change their head and figure out that once you start looking at the traveler, wow, shocker, the rest of it all falls into place. Nobody, by the way, nobody's still looking at the traveler. If you sat in board meetings at agencies and you listened to a CEO or CFO talk privately, there isn't any of them that are saying, how do we pay a traveler more money? None of them are thinking that way. None of them are thinking that let's focus on being the highest paying company and maybe things will take care of itself, because it's never been that way. In the history of our industry, focusing on the traveler has never kept agencies in business. I can speak from experience. It's focusing on the agency that keeps agencies in business, and that's what people have done, and they're going to continue to do so to their demise. I really believe that for sure. So let's talk about it. New technology. What are we talking about? I mean, obviously, there's a whole bunch of things out there. You guys see them. There's apps like the one I have. There are new methods, streamlined application process, streamlined texting platforms that are out there that allow recruiters to talk faster or better. There are almost an endless amount of ideas that are out there. And those are the ones you should be paying attention to, in my opinion. The ones that make sense to you, the ones that put the ownership of your own career back in your hands. And they're all out there. I mean, obviously, as like I said, apps are, I think, where it's going. I have an app. That's what we're basing our company on. I think that's an important aspect. It's one of the biggest changes that are out there. I mean, I just truly believe that what your smartphone can do instantly makes so much more sense than waiting around for a recruiter, hopefully to remember where you want to go and then start to pitch you a pay rate. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. So there are things like that are out there right now. There's been companies that have been doing similar things, whether they've been web-based or now app-based. You've got that technology. You've got, again, where you can apply to one company and 5 or 6 of them have it. There are websites, and there's always going to be somebody that's got the next, I guess, latest and greatest way to recruit. But I will tell you this. Technology is coming to healthcare travel. And I see it every day. Oh, I like talking to my recruiter, and I like this. I like the human element. Great. It's not for you then. But eventually it will be, because this is where the industry is moving toward. And it's one of the last industries, by the way, to move toward this. It is not something that is, ahead of its time by far. It is way behind its time, because it makes you guys way more efficient. It should, but it doesn't yet, pay you a lot more money to do the exact same thing that you're doing right now. But it's a much more comprehensive, foolproof, mistake-proof way of seeing the assignments that you want and getting the information you need to decide if this assignment makes sense for you or not. It just flat out is, So that's the technology aspect of it, and we're certainly going to talk a lot more about that as time goes by. First of all, there are trends in bill rates that I'm seeing right now. Like I just said a few minutes ago, the rates seem to be creeping back up. What you're seeing, you guys may not know this, so I'll share it with you. What I see is rates being posted, no activity. They're playing around with it for a while, and all of a sudden we'll get a new update. Okay, here's a new rate. It'll say it right on the thing, or the email we get, or the notification that we receive. Hey, new rate. And the rates rarely are going down like they were all spring. They absolutely were like a new rate. We'd submit somebody, and then we get a notification, hey, that your submission is high now because we've lowered the rate by 10 or 15 or $20. So now you've got to go back and decide if your candidate still wants it for that rate. And if they do, re-enter them at that rate. The opposite's happening right now. They're not getting the activity, or the candidates that they're seeing aren't cutting the mustard, so to speak. So they're saying, okay, we're going to go up a little bit more. So I'm seeing that consistently, and have been for most of the summer, where like I said, you got to give them a nod. They're doing their best to keep their costs low and trying to get you guys and the quality of travel they need in their department for the least amount of money they can. I understand it. And for many of you, it wasn't enough. For some of you, it works for me. What's happening, and there's no other explanation for that, is that they're not getting either the quality or quantity that they're looking for these jobs they're posting. So they have no choice but to go up slightly. And they're not going to go through the moon. They're going to say, well, maybe if we go up $10 an hour. What kind of quality are we going to get there? Maybe if we go up a little bit more than that. And that's what I'm seeing currently right now. I don't know if that's going to continue. I don't know if it's going to get to that place and stay. I don't know if they're going to get it and it's going to drop back down. It all has to do with the demand, period, and what kind of supply is out there. So the bill rates are kind of all over the place right now. I think it has a lot to do with the certain part of the countries that are, experiencing more needs than other parts right now. So you just have to pay attention. And like I said, only you know whether or not any given assignment makes sense to you. And just stop letting a recruiter try to talk you into something that you know in your heart doesn't make financial sense, or it makes financial sense, but the cost of living is incredibly high. You got to look at everything and be such a smart traveler right now. It isn't just about gross weekly. What is your net weekly going to be, and how much of that is going to have to go to housing and your other expenses? If you're in a vacation, summer vacation type town, and I've got many in there, you guys know your costs went up crazy. Going to the grocery store out here in California is insanely expensive. Going out to dinner, by the way, is insanely expensive. It's night and day what it even was last year, which was expensive. So the cost of living in vacation-y, touristy places like where I'm at right now is noticeably higher, which means you got to take that into consideration. Yeah, you're going to be making more money, but if you're spending it on just literally living expenses, it doesn't make sense. And maybe a lower paying assignment where the cost of living is low does. Like I've always said, you guys are smart enough, you're sharp enough to know this. And some recruiter who you hardly know, let's be honest, shouldn't be the one to try to be convincing you to take something that is or isn't in your best interest. Okay, I mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm going to talk about it again. I want to talk about extensions again a little bit. Guys, I apologize about the noise. I literally am. The U.S. Open of Surfing comes to this town once a year, and it's literally the construction for the stands and the big buildings. They sell the van stuff and everything, skateboard stuff and everything else is right here. So it's loud, so I apologize. But there's nothing else I can do. So if you're hearing all these trucks on the beach and stuff, that's what they're doing, like that one. So anyway, I want to talk about extensions a little bit because this is where I said many of you guys are on current assignments right now and you're getting offered to stay. And I think most of you can probably tell me honestly that the offer that you have to stay is less than what it was to start there. And that's because if you look back 3 months ago or even 2 months ago, if you're about 4 weeks out, be ending and you're getting the offer, it's because the demand isn't as high and the supply might be higher than what it was a couple months ago. So hospitals are doing their best. You guys have to sit there and decide, does this make sense? And the only thing I want to tell you, and this is not me trying to convince you to take a job with my company or any other company, but you have to really look at the cost of not being employed at all, and maybe for some of you that makes more sense. Going back home or doing per diem or going back to your permanent job, it makes more sense. But for many of you, I would tell you that even though you might be losing $400 or $500 a week, if it's still in that $150,000 range, consider that for 13 weeks. I mean, it's still amazing money. By the time you extend again, you're back up and you didn't just sit back and wait. For a lot of you, it's a matter of principle that you just don't want to work for something that you feel is so low. But I would just ask you to really consider, and again, I'm making some friends out there now with some of these agencies, that what you're being offered is still an incredibly good and lucrative opportunity for many of us. Sometimes it isn't. I've seen some that are like, whoa, I don't think they're going to take that. And I knew they wouldn't, and they didn't. And I applaud them for that. I have never, and those that work for me know, I've never tried to convince you to take a position that may or may not be in your best interest. Like I've said, I have to say what I mean, and that is that you guys are the only ones that know. People ask me all the time, especially the ones that work for my company, what do you think? And I'm like, I don't know. All I know is that this is where we are right now. Here's what it comes out to. What makes sense to you? Does this make sense to you? And for many people it does. For many people it doesn't. That's where we're at. But extensions are certainly an opportunity for you to stay with some familiarity, right? You know that facility. If you like the place, don't be upset with your manager. It's not his or her fault. It's going to be the people that are running the numbers of the hospitals that can say, here's what we can afford, and consider it. If it makes sense, jump on it for 13 more weeks. Maybe extend for 8. Maybe the rates will go up by then. 8 might be a little short. 13 is probably about perfect this time of year. By the time we do get to the end of September, when you're about 4 weeks out from this particular maybe extension, you might see an increase to stay if you increase in, in wage if you stay. And I think that's a reasonable thing to expect. I don't know if it'll be the case, but I certainly wouldn't think by the time we get to September, October, I don't think the rates are going to be dropping like they maybe are right now. So you might be able to maintain, or you might actually get an increase. It's really hard to say, but I do believe in my heart of hearts that by the time we get to Halloween, I don't think we're going to be in a situation where extensions are going to be less than what they are right now. I think they're actually going to be on the rise, and people will be offering a little bit more money for you to stay. So when it comes to an extension, you just have to really think about what's best for you, your family, the people that you provide for if you do, and that is, does this income weekly make sense for the cost of living where I'm at and based upon the lifestyle that I have and my expenses I have at this location, and really put some thought behind it. Don't just be knee-jerk reaction offended by what a hospital's offering your agency to be able to provide a pay rate for you. It may be incredibly reasonable. It may be, in fact, unreasonable, but look at it and consider it and take the ego out if you can. Hopefully there's not a sales aspect going on with your company where they're lowballing you and trying to keep a thicker margin, but that may be happening. So look and see what other travelers are making. And yes, you heard me say that, and I'll say it again repeatedly. You should be asking other travelers what they're making. And I don't care how many enemies I'm making when I say that. It's the fact. You guys are going to do it anyway. Be very wary of agencies that don't want you talking about your pay rate, that tells you that they're scared that you're going to find most people are paying more than they are. So that's a big warning sign to me. If your agency says, now, don't be talking about your rate, I would find an agency before I even went to work for them, because that's just that's just telltale. I mean, right? Now, when an agency says, I don't care, or an agency, doesn't even address it, that means they're less concerned about it. Or if an agency comes right out and says, talk about rates because we're proud of them, then that should also tell you a lot. And you should hold them to that, talk about it and find out. Let them know if someone's paying higher than them and how much that is. Make sure you're comparing apples to apples on that stuff. But that's what it all boils down to, is what you're making. So at any rate, extensions, I just want to say, just really think about them before you are instantly offended because it's so much less than what you were making. Consider that maybe what you were making was higher priced than what you should have, and hopefully you bank some of that, and now you can afford to take a little bit less because you're still making crazy money, just not what it was, and maybe it'll be closer to that point again here in a few more months. We'll see. All right, so I do believe, like I said, that the supply and demand is always has been and always will be the biggest factor in setting the bill rates, which again, hopefully in turn, your agency is one that the higher the bill rate, the more money you're making, and they don't have a sliding scale of margins. And I'll say this one time, I always say this a lot, many companies, you guys do know this, incentivize their recruiter. They have different commission plans. So if they offer you, if you accept a deal between, let's just say 20 and 25%, their recruiter's going to make this much money. If they have a margin that's 25 to 30, the recruiter's going to make this much money, a little bit more. If it's over 30, they might make even more money. So this is a very real thing, and I know this for a fact because I know people that have interviewed as recruiters for many, many companies. They've said, take a look at this. Is this sellable? And I'm like going, yeah, they're all the same. So many companies incentivize their recruiter to I guess, for lack of a better word, screw you over on rates. The more money the company makes, the more money the recruiter makes, and that's just a fact. And it's like that with many industries. We're not unique in that. It's not like recruiters are horrible people. Any salesperson, I don't care if you're buying a car or you're leasing a copy machine, the better deal the company makes, oftentimes the better that sales rep or that salesperson is getting from the deal because they were a good enough salesperson to have the dealership or whatever it is make more money. So they get more money. That's why they incentivize that. It's just part of life. So realize that just because a bill rate's going higher doesn't necessarily mean that you're with a company that's going to relay that savings and that higher income over to you. Some of it will be, but some of it will also be kept by the agency, and it is with all of them that have a certain margin on it. So understand that as we move into, like I said, the fall, hospitals are doing their best to try to save as much money as they can. Many of them were ill prepared to have the labor costs that they had for 2020 and 2021, and they're doing their best now to appease their shareholders, appease their corporations, and trying their best to have labor now at the lowest price they can. That's why we see these extensions and these rates going out that are almost ridiculously low, and they're not getting them met. You can see it out there. They're doing their best to hire as low as they can. For some, they're lucky that are in an attractive location or in a place where, it's for whatever reason that hospital has an easier time recruiting. They're going to get away with it. They're going to be able to offer a lower bill rate, which will in turn mean a lower pay rate for you guys, and people will take it. It might not be for you, but you cannot get mad at a traveler that it does make sense for. So don't, and stop the whole name calling of other travelers out there where you're mad at a traveler and saying, don't accept these low rates. People are going to. It's life. People take every single job there is out there. There are some jobs that I don't care if you're flipping burgers. There are burger places that pay a lot more than other places do, and people will still take the job that doesn't for all the reasons we just mentioned. Maybe it's right around the block from them. So the same thing applies to traveling. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to corner the market and convince every traveler not to take a job. There's going to be a traveler who's going to take it. It just isn't going to be for you. So hospitals are going to do their best. If they're not seeing the quality, the rates are going to go to where they need to go until they are being met. And they're not going to go a dime higher than that rate just because they were for a while there. It's just the way it's going to be. So how does this whole thing unfold? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. I'm cautiously predict things because when I predict them, I typically don't go too far to the extreme. And I think this is what we're going to be looking at. My guess, and this is my best guess, friends, is that I do believe that right now, for the rest of summer, things are going to kind of maintain. We're going to see some good where they are right now, I think they're going to stay. We might see some facilities in some areas, like here in California and some other places, that they're starting to rise up a little bit. But I do believe the rates will increase somewhat into the fall. And depending upon how, like I said, whatever it was I just got over, if that becomes more serious and more widespread, I think it's going to jump right back up for a while to where it was. But I think facilities, government bodies are running out of money and time to be able to offer insane rates like they were. We'll see what our government decides to do. But I do think that rates will increase just because the natural, health of U.S. citizens as we move into the winter months is going to be less than what it always has been. So I think that for those of you that are waiting for slightly higher, I think you're going to get your wish. I do believe that. And like I've always said, I don't ever think we're going to go down to 2019 rates ever again. But I don't think for a second that we're going to be anywhere near 2020 and 2021 rates. I think we're going to have a really good, solid industry that if this lifestyle is for you, you can make a ton more money traveling, as you should, for making all the sacrifices that you guys make than somebody who is doing your job permanently in a staff position at XYZ facility. It's just the way it should be. And I think that the temptation will be stronger because the rate is going to be higher and there'll be a slightly larger disparagement between what you're able to make as a traveler and what you could make as a staff individual. That rate is going to be bigger than what it was in 2019. But I don't think it's going to be insanely higher like it was. I think we'll have ebbs and flows, but I think that one thing hospitals have learned is that we need to have staff. And I do believe we lost a ton of travelers and healthcare professionals back at the end of, in the fall of 2021. And we just did about a little over a year ago. That happened. Well, there was a lot of decisions that were made that Travis said, I don't want to do this anymore. And a bunch of people left, which is horrible for us as a country and terrible for those people that really enjoyed doing what they were doing, what they felt their calling was. And I know a few of them. It sucks. But it is good news for the supply and demand model for so many of you that are looking for less competition. So, again, like I said, I'm always going to tell you the way it is. So, all right, let's talk about some involvement here, as we always said beforehand. So I will tell you guys this, that when I first got married many, many, many years ago, I interviewed with a company called Fast Staff U.S. Nursing for a marketing position because I was a marketing advertising guy, as I mentioned. And I really enjoyed this interview, more so than any other interview I had. It was a gentleman named Dan Mordecai, who became a very good friend of mine and a mentor of mine, and just a huge amount of respect for him. And I don't want to tear up because Dan passed away many, many years ago, but he saw something in me that I will always be incredibly grateful for, that had it not been for him, I wouldn't have been in this industry. But he hired me to two things, really. Well, I put it this way. It's kind of a funny story, and hopefully you'll listen to this, but it's interesting because I interviewed, and I had an unlisted number at the time, and come to find out they were trying to get a hold of me, but they lost my resume, or my paper resumes we had back in those days. And I thought, there's no interest there. But I thought, boy, what an interesting company. This is like substitute teaching for nursing. And they do these strikes, which is really weird. Never heard of that before. And at any rate, so I kind of forgot about it. Went to work for another ad agency in Denver and was just like, man, I just think this industry is not, I'm moving past this industry. It's too fast paced and too cutthroat. And I love the rock and roll, if you will, of advertising, but it was a dangerous field to be in. You could lose tons of money as a commissioned salesperson. Basically, there's no difference between that and anything else. With a couple of clients that just got fickle and decided they wanted to go with our agency, it was so tumultuous. I hated that, and I hated how delicate that whole thing was. So I was kind of disappointed to hear from him. So anyway, out of the blue, I did list my number. I don't remember why I did. Probably because I had gotten married. And literally the next day, I got a call from this Chris gal who turned out to be a good friend of mine too. And she's like, we've been trying to get a hold of you for 6 months because Dan really wants to hire you. So I went and met with him again on a Saturday or Sunday at like one of those Denny's type places. Another one of those crazy Dan Mordecai interviews where he just sat there and rubbing his eyebrows and he kept saying to me, kid, and I was a kid, basically. He goes, I want to hire you. I just don't know where to put you. He goes, but I got 1,000 different places to put you. But he said one of the nicest things anyone ever said. He said, there's talent, and I don't want to walk away from talent. He goes, that's what I'm trying to surround myself with this company with, is that I want to bring you on. So he said, I want to bring you on to change my marketing information, the design, the logo. He goes, but I also want you to run my sales department. And this is what I talk about. When I say recruiters are salespeople, he used those words. And I said, yeah, but Dan, I've never recruited a nurse in my life. And this company was all nursing, by the way, at the time. He goes, that doesn't matter. He goes, you've ran 4 or 5 sales departments. I'm like, I have. I've been a sales manager, my short career here, and I've worked myself up into a salesman position 4 times. He's like, well, I want you to do the same thing with mine. So it was really fascinating to me. I ended up going back home and telling my new bride, I'm like, this is weird. I don't really understand this industry, but I know that they go out to New York all the time, in California, and they're on these strikes. He goes, but mostly it's where these nurses go around and they work these contracts all over the country, and I didn't really understand. I didn't understand it. Again, simple concept, but I didn't really understand how the industry worked. And I actually went to work for this company and worked there for 3.5 years. And when I walked in the doors, I had no idea what they did. No idea what they did. But I got sucked into this incredibly wild world. And most of it was because of this gentleman who, like I said, I traveled the country with him a lot. I spent a lot of time with him. And I'm, again, forever grateful to Dan. He did pass away many years ago. I mean, it's been, what has it been? 16 years, maybe 17 years. It's been too long. But he put his impression on this industry. Back then, there wasn't that many companies that did this, and it was unique. And this was a company that actually took people that were on strike, and they converted them to travelers for the rest of the time. But then when there was a strike available, they had their kind of ability to be able to pick and choose the ones that were able to pull from assignments and take them on strike. So it was a pretty good model for them. It was one of the only companies, I think one of 2 companies that did strikes at the time. So he had kind of that market cornered. But it was trial by fire for me. I literally went to work, and less than 30 days after I started this company, I found myself in Times Square and out on Long Island and all over Manhattan, basically running operations for a strike that was going on out in Plainview. And it was just such a wild and incredible, like I said, it was almost like baptism by fire. Here you go, you're in there. The stories I could tell you, I mean, we literally had a few hundred nurses flying into 3 different airports out in New York, and we had no place to house them. We had to basically book an entire Hilton out on Long Island, and it was out of the blue. It was just incredible amount of money that was being transferred from the facility to the agency to then the hotel and these travelers every week. It's hard to understand, but when you're running an entire hospital system, it's a big deal. And to walk in and not even have a chance to kind of get warmed up to that industry, and next thing you know, I'm out there, they were flying my wife out to see me every other week, and they were getting us front row, basically passes to every theater on Broadway, just so I'd be happy, because I was miserable. I lived out there at that particular time for almost 6 months in a row, and never came back to Denver. And it was wild, no kids, no dog at the time, but it was a hard, I guess, like I said, baptism by fire. But boy, I sure learned a lot about the industry fast. I learned a lot about nurses, good, bad, and indifferent, but be able to be face to face with travelers who were making crazy money at the time, who were stressed out, who were wore out. They would oftentimes, just like you guys see with your patients, I would see the worst of these men and women because they were tired, they were hungry, they were wore out, they felt abused, they were going through, what they needed to do to make ends meet and to take this opportunity. But for many of them, it was a lot, and I sometimes was the blunt of that. If I couldn't get them into a hotel room that was 1 day and 1 night shift person, or somebody stole their toothbrush, or who knows. I mean, the stories you'd hear. It sounds almost silly now, but now that you understand how it works, it wasn't silly. People wanted things to be done and things to be done properly and right. So when it didn't, they would get upset about it. But for me, I never really thought that would be what I would do for so long. And as it turned out, I ended up kind of carving myself out in a really unique position there, where I was actually flying all over the country. A year or 2 later, I created a division for that company that I would fly out literally and meet with travelers one-on-one in a conference room. We'd schedule 20 of them in an hour, every hour, and we'd put them through the motions. We literally had faxes that were being sent to me. This is, okay, we're talking early 2000s, right? 2002, 2003. And they were sending me the most up-to-date needs we had right now. And I had this big old trunk, yes, and they would hand fill out these paperwork and all their applications. They would be sitting there after they were sold on going to work for us. They would fill out a skills checklist, and we would ship this trunk back to Denver. And oftentimes I would go from one city to another, wouldn't even come back. Sometimes I would travel with the trunk, come back and take a break. But it was fascinating for me, and I think one of the biggest helps that I had in this industry, the biggest boost, was I wasn't talking to travelers over the phone. I was talking to them face to face. I got to know why they wanted this lifestyle, why they were interested in this, if they'd already been traveling for their company, or if they were brand new. I really had a 3-year, I guess, learning curve that was really quick about what it is that makes travelers tick. And I don't think a lot has changed over the last 20 years. I think it's stayed similar. It just people are different. The times have changed. The technology has changed. But travelers still travel for all the same reasons. And I will say that back then, not two travelers were alike for the reasons they traveled. And I still believe that to this day, that two travelers aren't the same. But it was a wonderful experience for me that I just thought was going to be a short-term stepping stone until I got back into advertising, until I did something. But I was so fortunate, and I do want to say on this podcast that I'm incredibly grateful to Dan Mordecai for giving me this opportunity to be able to get in this industry that I fell in love with. And I fell in love with it fast. And I just never thought that staffing and medical and facility and travel staffing would be something that I would be interested in. But like so many of us on this side of the desk, it is a fun job. It is so different every single day. There's different fires to put out. There's good things. There's bad things. But it is a job that I think changes, and it's very eclectic, and it's just so different that I love that part about it. Some people don't. But I love the fact that you kind of got to stop what you're doing and fix something all the time. And that's pretty much what my job has become. And now it's just at a different level. But it's, again, I want you to understand that that's how I kind of got into this industry. It was a fluke. I didn't know that that's what I was going to end up doing. And I certainly didn't think almost 23 years later, 22, close to 23 years later, I'd still be doing this. But I am so grateful for that company, which has changed a lot now. I know it's a different company now. But back then it was privately owned. It was owned by Dan and a few investors, and it was a very family style situation. They were one of very few companies that were in the industry, and I think the only one, or there was a guy that used to work with Dan that spun off and got his own strike company that was doing those sorts of things. So I got to really learn a lot about the industry, and I know people don't like the strike nurses. Some people have a different opinion about them. I went into it without really having an opinion. It was just, this was the job. So for me, it was more interesting about the travel side, with a fast staff side, so to speak, that I found so fascinating, and how that started working, and learning the numbers and realizing even back then that, so all we really have to do is just convince these travelers to go to work for us and not anybody else, and we make this much money, and all we have to do is basically float payroll. It was my first kind of eye-opening experience saying, that's a really easy way to make money. Now, it turns out it's not so easy. So for those of you that are looking at doing this, it's more difficult than it sounds. If you have a finely running machine like they did back then, and once you get to that point, it can be quite simple. But getting to that simplicity of things running smoothly, I think, is where most new agencies struggle. So be careful of that if you're a traveler, and be careful of that if you're thinking about starting an agency, because it is lucrative, but it can also cost you everything if you don't know what you're doing, and you'll lose it all. So hope that was helpful, guys. We're going to talk more about it. We're making our way into what we're doing now. I want to give you a little bit more history on that, but that was the Fast Staff U.S. Nursing Corporation days and how I got in this industry. So, guys, the state of the market, it's crazy right now. I think it's going to continue to be a little bit all over the place, but I think once things settle down, as always, we're going to have ourselves an amazingly lucrative, great industry that travelers, if they're smart and they're well-educated, can do really well for themselves, as long as you keep watching Travel Evolved. And with that, I will catch you next week.